his spirit separated from his body,
Okay,
then
I didn't,
that's yes,
brother. I
that
didn't
happened.
ask that, brother. Did Jesus stop or lose control over his body?
Wow, wow. Loki, you're smart. I can't lie, you're smart. Well, um, okay, yes, yes, in a sense, yes.
Okay, if he lost control over his body, meaning if he wanted to open his eyes, he couldn't have, right?
Uh, no.
He couldn't. He couldn't have.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not God. God.
All right, so let's try to reconstruct his own argument for him in a valid argument. So it goes as follows. Premise 1. If Jesus is dead, then his body cannot perform living bodily functions, i.e. like opening up his eyes. Jesus is dead. Therefore, Jesus' body cannot perform living bodily functions. Premise 4. If Jesus cannot perform living bodily functions, then Jesus has lost control over his body. Therefore, Jesus has lost control over his body. Premise 6. If Jesus has lost control over his body, then Jesus is not God. Jesus has lost control over his body. Therefore, Jesus is not God. So how to respond to this? Before we get into the refutation, I want to make a quick announcement. A lot of you guys have been asking me how to support the channel. So I created a GoFundMe so that I can purchase the equipment, computer, camera, good Wi-Fi, so that I can start streaming for you guys, so that I can have interviews with professional philosophers, host debates. I know a lot of you guys want to see me debate, or have just like live reactions with other prominent Christians that you guys know about. So if you guys want to help the channel, please consider donating. Appreciate every donation that you guys give. And again, thank you guys so much for supporting the channel. God bless all of you guys.
Okay, let me try and get this straight. So Jesus's body is always Jesus. Is like always a part of Jesus,
Yes.
even at the point of death. Okay.
Yes.
So if Jesus can't control his body, then he can't control an aspect of himself, and God is supposed to be able to do all things. Per this understanding.
That's right.
Okay.
So let's get into it. So the problematic premise is the fourth premise, that if Jesus cannot perform normal bodily functions, then Jesus has lost control of his body, or God has lost control of his body. Now, there's an ambiguity here, because when he asks the question, can Jesus open his eyes when he's dead? Right? This could mean two things. He could be asking, can he open his eyes as a living being with the animating principle that is life of the body? And the answer is no, right? That's just a description of the fact of the body. The soul is separated from the body. So the body is no longer living. And so as a living organism, it is dead, right? Or not as a living organism, as a dead body, it can no longer open his eyes as a living organism. Now, does that mean he lost control over his body? No, that's just a description of a dead body, right? But can he control his body in any sense? Well, yes, as God, as a divine person, he could move his body with, divine powers. Think of God sort of raising a body from the dead without that body having the animating principle of life, without having, functioning bodily organisms, all of that. God could open up a dead body's eyes. God could make a dead body walk, right? Now, the real question is, could God will that body function as a living organism at any moment? Yes, that is exactly what happens when Jesus resurrected. And so the question then, when he says, can God open his eyes? Well, it depends. As a dead body, no. That's just a description of what it means to be dead, right? You're no longer living, so there's no soul in the body. There's no animating principle of life. But can God open up his eyes? Can Jesus open up his eyes? Yes, in both senses, right? In both senses, meaning in the first sense, God can resurrect himself. He could will at any moment in order to give his body the principle of life, or he could puppeteer, in a sense, his own body. Even if he is still dead, he could move his body, raise it from the dead without ordinary bodily functions.
Death, regardless of soul and body or not, is more observably recognized as the cessation of bodily and life functions. That is to say, when someone dies, they can't control their body anymore and their organs stop working.
What's really happening here is he's equivocating on the phrase loss of control, right? Because we are just going to deny that dying or being dead is not a loss of control. Rather, it is just a biological fact about a state of a body. The loss of control would imply that God either failed to resurrect a body, meaning that he willed the body to come into life again, and it did not occur, or God failed to, in a way, sort of puppeteer the body, where the body's not alive, but he, opens up his eyes, he walks around, speaks even maybe. And both of those God could do. Now, the sense that we're saying no when he says, could God open up his eyes, is just the sense in which we're describing a sort of fact about the biological state of that corpse, which is just to say it no longer has a soul, no longer has the animating principle of life, of which it normally controls bodily functions in a biological living organism. So remember, Orthodox Muslims said that in order to be dead, right, he said, you need the cessation of bodily functions. We can actually agree with that completely. If something is dead, it ends the cessation of bodily functions as a living organism, meaning there is no principle of life in the body such that the bodily functions are restored, right? So we can agree with that completely. But that does not mean, again, that God lost control of his body, because at any moment, God could will that the body breathes and the body would be alive. At any moment, God could raise his body from the dead, right? Even though it's still dead. And the body would be dead, but the divine person, Jesus, would be raising his dead body. It's exactly what he did, right? So there's no loss of control. So to be very direct about the equivocation, it's happening exactly where he says Jesus cannot open his eyes. Because the cannot there, he's acting as if that's about divine willing or divine providence. But what he really means there is that the body is not informing, or the soul is not informing the body as a living organism anymore, meaning the soul is not informing the body with the capacity to open its eyes as a living body. That's just a biological fact, right? So he's not saying can in the sense of agency there. He's just giving us a fact. The soul is no longer informing the body. The next premise then concludes that therefore he lost control of the body. Well, how does that follow from just the biological fact? In order to lose control, again, he would need to assume that because there's a lack of living bodily functions, therefore there's a lack of divine providence. That's exactly what we're going to deny. Because at any moment, God could, snap his fingers, bring that body back to life. Snap his fingers, give that body back its soul, snap its fingers, raise the body from the dead, even though it's not living. So he's just equivocating on cannot open his eyes from a description of a dead corpse to divine providence or divine causation. He does not mean divine causation when he's asking that question, and he's saying cannot there to try to confuse the Christian and equivocate between a biological fact and a fact about divine causation or divine providence. So the main point of this critique is that a description of what the body is doing biologically is not a statement about the fact of the matter of whether or not God has lost control over that body. That's exactly what he needs to justify again, which he has not done.